currently based in London. And I'm joined by my co-host, Yasmin, who's based in Ramallah. Hey, Yasmin, how are you?
Hey, myself, doing great.
So today on our series, our special guest is Alia Azouqa, who did a presentation a couple of months ago for our Amman chapter.
And if you're new to the podcast, each episode lets us meet AFIKRA presenters who have spoken at one of our events around the world. So Alia, like every one of our presenters, was asked to choose a topic that allowed her the opportunity to explore something new, something she's not an expert in. And our goal is that this episode inspires others to become curious about other aspects of the Arab world's histories and cultures.
Yeah, and today Alia is taking us through a spotlight presentation. And for anyone who doesn't know, a spotlight is a medium-length presentation where the presenter focuses on one person or community, movement, place, etc., etc. And Alia's choice was to research who are the Circassians and how did they end up in the Middle East. Welcome to our AFIKRA community podcast. Hello, Alia. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, nice to be here.
So we're here to talk about your presentation that you did in our Amman chapter back in February, but we're also here to get to know you. So please, Alia, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're based, what do you do?
Okay, so I'm Alia Azouqa. I'm based in Amman right now. I was in the UAE for a very, very long time, as I mentioned before. I am an aspiring writer. I'm trying very, very hard. It's not easy. I had a 10-year career in corporate marketing, and I'm trying to just shift away from that now.
Amazing. What are you writing about?
I'm actually writing about Circassian mythology right now. And this is what led me to do the research on this project. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Very exciting. Okay. So completely directly relevant to this, which is very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And this was your first AFIKRA presentation?
This was my first. It was only my second event as well, but I was just inspired by the community and how easy it was to present in front of everyone.
Nice. Okay. And so what led you to picking this topic specifically?
So when I started reading about Circassian mythology, because I wanted to write a book kind of in the English language for all ages, I call it. I kind of tend to write towards middle grade fiction, but I wanted to have a wider sense of mythology in the region. And I don't know, I started reading a lot about Circassian history to kind of understand the culture before I understood the mythology of it and where all of that stemmed from.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, now I'm really excited to listen to this presentation. I mean, okay, on that note, I think we'll jump right in and let you get started. So take it away, Alia.
So this is a question about Circassians in the Arab world. I had a question about who they were and how they got here. And when I started the research for this project, I thought I kind of knew how we got here. I thought the history only spanned about a couple of 100 years. As most people knew, in 1864 is when all the Circassians were exiled out of southern Russia. But the more I delved into it, the more I realized there is a much richer history. And I started delving into the Middle Ages and North Africa and how Circassians were kept moving through the region for the last 1,000 years. And it was just super interesting to me. So just a little background on who the Circassians are. So it's a 6,000-year-old culture. Unfortunately, we don't have a country. So today, Circassia is part of southern Russia. So it's that area between the Black and the Caspian Seas. So to the south, there's Georgia and Abkhazia. And to the east of us, there's Chechnya and Dagestan. And these are all, I would say, cousin cultures to our own. And there's actually a history of 6,000 years of culture in the region that are documented. And there's even 10,000-year-old relics called dolmens, which I was actually researching because dolmens are called iswina in Circassian, which means dwarf houses. And so they're actually ancient grave sites. But we don't know much about that. So the culture is documented for 6,000 years, but the history of the region is even much older than that. So how they started to move into the region, what I discovered is that there was this practice that started about 750 AD from the Abbasid to the Fatimid eras, and it continued for about 1,000 years. There was a practice of taking boys from different regions of their empire and training them to be soldiers. So essentially, these were slave soldiers, and they were taken as very young boys. And this continued for far too long, if I have any say in it. And it spanned into the Mamluk era, where during the Middle Ages, there actually ended up being a lot of foreign rulers in Egypt. So there was sultanates, and then there was caliphates, and there was people ruling the same people at the same time. And kind of, it's a very complicated history, and I don't fully understand it myself. But it was kind of people ruling over the same regions at the same time. And often with the Mamluk eras, what would happen is that you would have people from Turkic origins and even from Circassian origins that were ruling over an Arab land. And I think that the commonality, the thing that made it acceptable was the spread of Islam and how these different cultures were embracing the religion. And so they weren't seen as foreign rulers so much, they were seen as other Muslim rulers. So during the end of the Mamluk era is actually when the Circassians began to rise into power. And after the Bahri dynasty, which I think were, if I'm not mistaken, Turkic-led, there was something called the Burji dynasty, which was the Circassian era of the Mamluk period. And that spanned 135 years. And you can still see there's very much sort of sense of who these people were in the architecture in Egypt. So you can see the Qa'at Bey citadel, for example, in Alexandria. Qa'at Bey was actually a Circassian ruler. There's actually a couple of examples in the slides, but I won't go into too much detail on that. So the history spanned much, much further back than I ever imagined. And my family history, as far as I know, is only about 150 years in the region. So what happened between the Mamluk era and the Ottoman Empire, the end of the Ottoman Empire, that whole period is a bit muddy for me. But I know that region of southern Russia was really coveted by both Russia and the Ottoman Empire. So Russia has, officially we call it what happened, the 100-Year War, and after it, the exile happened. So that was towards the end of the Ottoman era. So you're talking about 1763 to 1864, 101-Year War. This is actually very timely that we're recording this in May, because 21st of May is actually our day of exile, or our Nakba.
Wow. Oh, that's so crazy because of the date similarities. We're both, and it's both in May as well. Like it's an insane kind of parallel. It's just the years differ. So during this whole period, you can actually see the Russian rule, the effect of it in the region from as early as the 15th century, I think it would be. So I think everyone's heard of Ivan the Terrible. I mean, his reputation precedes him a little bit just for the nickname, but he was one of the first, or the first Tsar of Russia. Again, correct me on this if I'm wrong. And he actually married a woman called Maria, but her name was actually I can't remember her name, but she was a daughter of a Circassian prince named Timur. So they actually changed her name from Maria to Maria, and they gave her a Russian last name as well. And it was because Russia was trying to come into our region, because southern Russia, if you look at the area, it's warmer, has access to the Black Sea and trade routes. It's a great agricultural land. So it was all very, very highly coveted. And this is why for many, many years, and during this 101-Year War between the Circassians and the Russians, the Ottomans were also coming into the region. So what happened is there was always the Russo-Ottoman Wars and the Russo-Circassian Wars.
and there was constantly infighting. And there's a kind of a misunderstanding between Circassians today, I think, that they think we were always on the Ottoman side, and it's not true. I think we're just fighting against a common enemy, who was, the Russian Empire. And Islam spread very, very slowly throughout the region. So it started during the Middle Ages, I believe, and during the Fatimid and Caliphate, and the Abbasi Caliphate. And it spread over many, many centuries through the Ottoman Empire eventually. And that's how we came to move south into the Arab world. So it's actually through the Ottoman Empire and through Ottoman ships that we traveled through the Black Sea when Russia declared that this land was theirs. There was a forced exile and a mass migration. So you have to understand that during this period of war, during the last period, the numbers are documented by the winner of the war. To the victors go the spoils, right? So it's anywhere between 600,000 and 800,000 people that were massacred. And the number goes as far as 1.5 million people. We're not actually sure. But there's even one specific tribe that I mentioned during my presentation, the SOU'AL, who were 300,000 people, and what was left of them was only 3,000. So if you meet any SOU'AL family, give them a hug. They've been through hell. That was actually SOU'AL's entire tribe, and now they are just a small family. I mean, I don't say a small family. What I mean to say is people who adopted the name SOU'AL as the tribe name, not the family name, because there were so few of them left by the end of it. So yeah, it's just a really sad and rotten history, and it's very difficult to talk about because it makes me want to cry, because I say this like it's ancient history, but this is actually my great grandfather's time. Yeah. And I know his story. He was forced to leave when he was only 7 years old. And
this is what I was really curious about right now. Because you said like you guys, it's a very tragic story. It's a repeated story that keeps repeating in history afterwards. Growing up in Amman, I'm sure, in school, this story never came out in world history class or maybe your social studies classes. How did you kind of learn all this, or as part of you? Because it's part of you and part of your own history.
It's actually even more complicated for me because I grew up in the Gulf. So I grew up in Abu Dhabi. So I spent all of my summers in Amman, and my cousins actually go to currents still go to actually a Circassian school here. So there's Madrasa Amir Hamza, which is a very Circassian community school, if you will. So they kind of knew about it, but a lot of it was oral history. It's not something that they learned in their curriculum. They do learn the language and they learn the dance and the music. But for me, this is all very much third hand. So when I only started to learn about this, I actually did for a research project in the 9th grade. I actually did a presentation on the Circassians, and it was one of the sources I used in my presentation today from a book by Mohammed Hazandouqa, I believe, called The Circassians, and that's how I learned about the history. And
so that's been with you since 9th grade.
Yeah, it's been sitting in the back of my mind since then. And I only started doing the research on the Mamluk era actually after reading a book that barely touches on it by Reem Bassioni. She's an Egyptian writer, and she writes about kind of the Mamluk era period as well. And that sparked my interest because one of the characters in the book speaks a foreign language and is not of the region. So I started looking into that more.
Wow. Okay. That's so interesting. I mean, the personal connection that you have just weaves in so well and in such an interesting way into the not just the history, the general history, but the local community and everything like that. It's so interesting to find out more.
So I don't know how much you know about the diaspora communities, but there is actually more Circassians still in exile, I would say. I know it's been many generations, but there's actually more globally than there are in southern Russia. So that's the crazy thing. The greatest Circassian community is in Turkey, and it's anywhere between 2 and 3 million. Again, these numbers are official numbers, but they're based on who speaks the language and who still has the family name, which, after 150 years, who still does. We try. But so the biggest communities in Turkey, you'll find big communities in Syria as well. There's obviously a large representation in Jordan. There's even 2 villages in Palestine still today that very much speaks the language and carry on the culture. I have cousins in America. I have cousins in Libya. I have family in Egypt. Like, they're just everywhere, And it's just, I only have one uncle who moved back to southern Russia and found relatives there. But I was very, very far removed cousins with a similar or same last name.
And I was actually just thinking now, so in all of these countries where you have Circassian communities, like, is it easy for them to hold on to their culture? Is there, like, I know that you said that, for example, in Amman there's schools and things like that, but has there been any pushback on kind of retaining those cultures, whether it's the music, the dancing, the language, or anything like that?
So I think for sure every country that they move to, there's a lot of nationalism wherever you go around the world. But I think Circassians have been very good about embracing and retaining their culture. So when I visited my great-grandfather's village a few years ago, I felt like a foreigner, but I also felt home at the same time, because there are certain traditions that we've kept. So there's a moral code that predates religion or anything, and it's called Khabsa. Khabsa. Adik is actually what we call ourselves, and Khabsa is our moral code. So the word Circassian doesn't really mean anything to a Circassian. It's just an English version of the word for where people are. And so that moral code, it trumps almost everything else in our life. There, like, there's things that are represented in a lot of cultures, including, and they kind of match up with Middle Eastern culture as well, in terms of respecting your elders, standing up when an elder enters the room. That kind of thing is still very much prevalent. And the good thing about Circassians as well is that they've always maintained a Circassian Cultural Association. So they're Khassas, which are homes to all Circassians around the world. So there's many, many of them in Turkey. There's a couple in Jordan. I'm sure there are many in Syria, although I don't know of them myself. I know there's one in America, I think in New Jersey. And that's where people kind of gather, they congregate, they speak their language, they teach dance, they teach music, they teach language. And it's very much holding on to their culture. And people still, on special occasions, they dress in the old Circassian garb. I'm sure for anyone listening, an image might come to mind of a man wearing kind of what they think is a Cossack uniform, but it's actually adopted from Circassian culture. So with the black woolen hat and the long cape with the, if you see on the chest, there's places for weapons. So there would be like bullets and gunpowder in their chest pockets. And they've always got the famo or the short sword on their waist. Yeah, so it stemmed from, because I would say ceremonial, but I think this was kind of how people dressed every day. Because again, this is the people that went through hundreds of years of war. They were always soldiers. They were always fighting. They were always, trying to protect their land. It is, and when you look onto the mythology as well, the interesting thing is, if you ever heard of the Amazon women, the warriors, they're actually sources that attributed to the Amazon warriors to our region. So there was the ancient kingdom of Colchis, and that coexisted with ancient Greece. And it was from that area north of that. Colchis is now today modern day Georgia, and the north of Georgia is Abkhazia. which is where the Abazes are from, if you've ever heard that family name. The Abazes are a huge tribe. And there's a kind of, there's a link there that they believe that the Amazon warrior woman and that mythology stemmed from that area. Because it wasn't just the men fighting, because who's loved otherwise? So yeah, I think that was super fascinating tie-in for me as well. As much as we've held on to our culture, the families who were exiled during the mid-19th century, so 1864 onwards, they very much retain their culture. But I think this is the difference between families who are forced to migrate and families who chose to migrate prior to that period. So there are, so I did meet, for example, my name Azouqa is a Circassian name because Uqa is often, it means son of Yuqa. So any Circassian name that ends with Uqa, you will know where they're from. But there's also a family here called Azouqa, which is an Arabized version of the name. And we always thought maybe it's a coincidence. But Azouqa are actually from a village in Palestine. I'm not sure where exactly, sorry, I don't recall. And Dr. Mohammed Khair Mansur, who wrote one of the books that I've referenced, was actually a patient of a doctor called Azouqa, and she was the one who told me, she's like, he told us that we actually have Circassian roots. We're not entirely sure that it's the same family, but removed by a couple of centuries, you know?
Wow.
So you will have people who moved in from the 1700s or earlier, and then people who moved in the 1800s and later, and who will have a similar last name, and one is Arabized and one is not, but they don't identify as Circassian anymore. And again, I think it's because people who chose to leave grateful versus people who were forced to leave because of war.
Of course. I think
and how much you retain the culture and how much you kind of try to hold on to traditions as much as you can.
Yeah, I think that there are similar sentiments all across the region when people have left because of war or occupation, anything like that. You know, when you're kind of forced to leave your land, you hold on and you try and retain the culture as much as possible in the new place that you're based in.
Yeah.
Especially when it's outside of the region.
Exactly. So this is why now there's this question of the right of return. So this is a book that my uncle wrote, Mohammed Azouqa, and it's called Qadiyya Circassiya, or the Circassian Cause. And he talks a lot about the right of return to our lands. And a lot of people from my generation and even my parents' generation have started to move back, either to study at university or actually to move in and settle there. So one of my uncles moved back in the 80s. So after the breaking apart of the USSR, he kind of, he took that opportunity to go and move back and claim his right there and started the businesses, and he's now raised a family there. It's a beautiful story of, one of the examples of people who returned, but it's not an easy thing to do. Because if I today try to go and get a passport, it'll be a Russian passport and my name will be changed to Azouqa or anything that ends with a Russian sounding. Yeah, so it's the same thing that they've been doing for centuries. So the same as, Ivan the Terrible's wife Maria, her name was changed from Taymurok to Taymurokova or something similar to that. I'm not sure it's in the presentation, but it's a Russianized version of the name. Yeah. So we still have 3 republics, and you can see the Circassian flag on the screen if you're looking. It's the 12 stars, which represents the 12 tribes, and the 3 republics are the 3 arrows. So they are somewhat self-governed, but they still are Russian territory. So it's all part of Greater Russia. At the end of the day, it's not a fully independent state.
Okay, so so this flag is still used in
this
the present
flag is still
day,
used in the Republic of Adigay. So again, there's 3 republics. There's Kabardino-Balkaria, which is Kabardino is from Kabarday, which is a Circassian tribe, and Balkaria is from Balkar, which is a Turkish origin. So it's not even a fully Circassian state. It is anyone from the region was kind of pulled into. So even when you're driving through, so when I visited a few years ago, when we were driving through the villages, I swear to God, it was like planted between each other. So there would be a Circassian village, and then a Russian-speaking village, and then a Balkar Turkic-speaking village, all one after the other, like planted between one another. And I think it was, Russia's attempt to kind of unify the region as Russian and not, so that the Circassian villages wouldn't be communicating with each other and saying, this is our territory only. It's a very bizarre place to visit, beautiful place to visit, but it's a very bizarre feeling to go back now. I know people are trying to move back, and I believe there's a lot of Syrian families who moved back after the war as well. And so while Circassians are very happy and comfortable in their new homes now, it's still, there's just this feeling that this is my home that I want to go back to. This is my land. These are people who speak my language, who embrace my culture. And there's just a very strong feeling about the right of return, and it's just not an easy thing to do.
So when it comes to this concept of the right of return, do the communities have that right fully, or is there anyone preventing them from actually going back to their previous lands or communities, or even the cities or the countries in itself? Like, is there anything that's kind of
it's the decision? The decision comes back to the Russian government when we're talking about Abkhazia. So Abkhazia is also recognized as an independent state, but about half the countries in the world, but not by Russia. But if I wanted to move back to Russia, like I said, I would have to get a Russian name. I would have to speak the Russian language. I would have to prove through documentation who my family is and that I do have the right to return. So it's doable. It's just not made easy. And it is, it's very difficult for me to embrace the fact that I might have to move back and change my name from Azouqa to Azouqa.
Of course.
Yeah. Because I do have my cousin, for example, her name is Mashouqava on her passport, but she's Mashouqa, So it's, so people have done it. It's just, it's a tricky process.
Yeah, of course.
And again, you won't be returning to your state. You'll be returning to what is now modern day Russia.
Of course.
So it would be a Russian passport. There's no such thing as a Circassian passport as far as,
Yeah.
So I think Yasmin pulled up this map of the Circassian genocide happening over many, many centuries. But if you see the territories dwindle down into what they are today, you look at the size of that. And when I saw this map, the first thing I thought of was the Palestine-Israel map. And it's just, it's a really painful parallel to draw where, these are people who are just facing a similar fate, and it's just history repeating itself, although, many decades apart.
My general question is what would be the kind of general characteristics of Circassian culture? So in terms of you kind of touched on the clothing, but in terms of the dancing, the music, the things like that, how does it stand apart from, if there's a community within Syria, within Jordan, within all of these different places, Palestine, etc. What kind of makes them stand apart in their own cultural characteristics?
So today, the strongest tie-in, I would say, is the music. There is the music that we use is accordion based.
Okay.
So if you hear that in the region, there's different kinds of accordions as well. And there's, the Circassian accordion. And when you hear that, it's instantly recognizable wherever you go in the world. If you have any Circassian background, you have heard these songs, some of the lyrics to the music. You're very familiar with the dance style. It's just something that's instilled in you when you're very, very young. So even though I grew up in the Gulf and I didn't have much exposure to it, I spent all of my summers in Jordan, and that's kind of the tie-in, was always music and dance. And we would always attend the concerts because they're still very, very much active in Jordan. They perform in Jarash every year, for example, and Mahrajan Jarash. The language, I would say a lot of people are making a lot of effort to learn. I, for example, have only about 100 words in my vocabulary, and I think it's attributed to the fact that I didn't grow up here. If I did, I probably most definitely would have been going to a Circassian school and learning the language. So that's something that people still very much hold on to. There are a lot of families who speak it at home. But when it came to my parents' generation, there was a little bit of muddling and it was a bit lost because while all my grandparents spoke Circassian at home, but then with my father's generation, for example, his mother spoke it at home. So he understands what it sounds like. He understands the intonations and the dialect and everything, but he never actually spoke it. And he's kind of learning it now at the ripe old age of 70, bless him. And he's just starting to learn it. My sister's been learning it. My sister's a musician and she's been writing songs in Circassian. So yeah, it's a really beautiful thing that we're still very much holding on to. An ancient language, by the way. I don't know of any languages that are comparable to it because you're talking about a tongue that is thousands of years old. So it's still very much the way words are formed as well is interesting because you find people who speak it. Sorry, I'm running over myself a little bit. But like if you have a word like belt, you have one word, it's 4 letters in English, it's 1 syllable. But in Circassian, before the belt existed, there was ropes. And there was waists, and there was a word for rope, and there was a word for waist, and there was a word for around. So the word for belt is rope tied around waist.
Oh, wow.
Even the word for really simple things like egg, is the thing that comes from the chicken's tail. It's not just egg. There's very long and complicated languages, so why it's so difficult to learn unless you pick it up when you're quite young.
I love that though. It's so really visual.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you'll find that in like a lot of older languages as well. Like I think Germanic is probably similar. In even modern German today, you'll find like words that are like, 30 letters long.
Yeah, because it's just like different sections, like different words, kind of like glued together. Yeah, it's so interesting.
And like I said, the other thing that ties them is the habsa, the way of life, the moral code. When an elder enters a room, you stand up, no questions asked. There was things that I don't know if they're still practiced today, but up until my father and my uncle's generation, it was impolite to play with your son because your son was a boy and he was going to be a soldier. So that wasn't seen. That wasn't something. And I think you'll still find it. Like I don't want to say that I was raised very strict because my father was a very family oriented man. But you can still see where lines are drawn, between my father and my brother, for example, about like he was different, raising him because he was raised in a very strict way. And it's just this generational trauma, I think, that stems from war after war after war. And it's just like these people didn't know peace for a very, very long time.
Yeah, no, of course. And like any community under threat and any kind of very militarized or any people who have been forced to undergo that level of trauma, it's obviously going to seep through throughout the generations, and people will kind of feel on the defense a lot of the time. And then that will have an effect on how people interact with each other and memory and all of those different things. Yeah. And like you said, also even clothing, like with the gunpowder and the little pockets for that and things like that, like clothing, music,
and
all of these things.
And still in ceremonial dress, they're still carrying their weapons all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's partly ceremonial, but a lot of it is because people had to be ready at some point for war and to defend their communities. And it's so interesting to see how all the different communities in the region kind of respond to it.
And it's actually still kind of like a running joke, at least in my family. It's like, you won't find my father just lounging around in pajamas during the day. That won't happen. He always has to be ready for war. That's the joke,
Wow. I mean, it's funny, but it's also really sad how this kind of comes through the generations. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Alia, I just wanted to ask, just before we finish, if someone wanted to learn more about the community, about the Circassian community, like I'm sure you've got some stuff in your references, but like, are there any specific resources that you think would be a great start for people, whether they're from the community themselves and they want to know more, or if they're completely brand new? What do you think?
So the book I read when I did my ninth grade research paper was the Circassians, and that's in my references, I think, at the end here. Um, and that was written by is that not in my references here? My apologies.
No, it's okay. I mean, no, it's okay.
So that one is written in English as well, so it's a bit more accessible to a wider audience. But yeah, oh, sorry, here it is. Mohammed Khair Hagandoga, the Circassian.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure where you could find that. It is in my family library and a lot of Circassian families as well. But that one is a good one. And honestly, I want to give props to whoever wrote the Wikipedia page on Circassian because it is very detailed. And it did help a lot, honestly, during the research phase as well.
That's amazing.
There's a lot of resources that are in Russian. There's a lot of resources in Arabic. There's a few in English, not as many as I would like. But I'm currently reading a book written by, I believe, a Canadian and published in America about Circassian mythology. So that's very specific to the mythology, though it's not so much about the culture and the region and the people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting that it was written by a Canadian professor in America.
That is interesting. No, there's so much I want to learn more about, and I'm sure anyone who's listening to this or watching this will feel the same. That like we've learned so much in the last half an hour or so, but I feel like we've also only scratched the surface, and there's so much more to find out. So definitely, for anyone who's listening or watching, please check out the references and do some of your own research too. There's so much more to find out. Alia, thank you so much for this. This has been fascinating.
Cheers. Thank you for having me.
Before we let you go, we're going to do a little fun trivia game. Well, we like to think it's fun anyway.
Oh, dear.
No. It's very simple. It's very easy. It's something that we like to do with all of our podcast guests. It's just a little bit of trivia. So it's just going to be 4 questions.
Okay.
So, and Yasmin is going to help me make sure the answers are right as well. So hopefully Yasmin is ready too. All right. So Alia, name one UNESCO World Heritage Site in Iraq.
In Iraq?
Yeah.
Ooh. That's really difficult. I actually don't know.
I'm Iraqi. No pressure, no pressure.
No pressure. I want to say that a lot of Iraqi culture, history, as well as in a lot of museums around the world, including.
It's very true. It's very true. Yes, yeah. Everyone's stolen our stuff. I agree. But no, don't worry. So there's a few that you could have chosen. But unfortunately, to be honest, a lot of them aren't that well known. So I don't blame you at all. But there's Babylon, there's the citadel of Erbil, there's the marshes of southern Iraq, Samarra. There's quite a few actually, but there's so much that people don't know about when it comes to Iraq's heritage sites. So
yeah, I think the closest I got to it is probably the Reichstag in Berlin, of all places. So.
Yeah, exactly. That should be a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Iraq, but unfortunately, it's in Berlin.
Same museum also has Shebka Palace wall from Jordan. So saying.
I know. I did a whole AFIKRA presentation on how did the Ishtar Gate end up in Berlin.
Oh, wow.
And so clearly I have my own feelings about this.
Yeah. And the Shebka Palace right next to it is written it was a gift. So
yes, exactly. Interesting gift. Okay, second question. Name 3 flags that have stars on them.
Oh, the Circassian flag.
There we go. Number 1.
And the Jordanian flag. That's another.
Counts. Yes, the Jordanian flag.
Yeah. Tunis, I believe, has a crescent and star.
It does, yes. Yes, absolutely. All right. Okay, and then third question. What is the capital of Oman?
Muscat.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been there actually. I had a friend who lived there. Yeah.
Amazing. I've always wanted to go. And then the final question is name one song by Feiruz.
One song by Fairuz. I'm going to say Hadir al-Bosta just because it has my name in it. عيونك يا عليا.
Love that. Amazing. Okay. Well done. Well done, Alia. Great response.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
You are a certified AFIKRA nerd. We love it. And yeah, thank you so much for a fascinating presentation. It's been great to learn so much more about this topic.
Thanks so much for having me again. Cheers.
Thank you, Alia.
That was so great. By the way, Maisa, did you notice how our 3 video feeds brought back the same profile image almost? Big brunette, wavy curly hair, and bigger glasses.
It's the AFIKRA blueprint. This is just the way the AFIKRA nerds look.
Yep. So I was Alia's coach as she worked on preparing this presentation for the Amman Salon event. And I had learned so much about a group of people that, to my own personal shame, I had known nothing about prior to meeting Alia. And the personal connection that she has to the subject and the stark similarities to like my own Palestinian background made this all the more fascinating to break down in terms of history and the aftermath. It was overall just really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I knew so little about Circassian history to the point where I didn't even know how to pronounce the name. Something that me and Alia spoke about just before we started recording, actually. But yeah, like the community's history in the Memluk period, and also how widespread the community is now across the region, and their desire and struggle to return back to their lands. Just like you said, that parallel with the Palestinian community is so interesting.